Well, we are here right now with our very own George Thomas. And George, you just got back from an incredible trip in Uzbekistan. Healing miracles and supernatural dreams, they're breaking out all across the country. So before we dive into too many details, just give us an overview. What did you see there?
Well, this is a part of the Central Asia region. In fact, the countries they call them the Stan countries, right? So Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and obviously Uzbekistan, and then you've got Afghanistan in the region. And these were all, except for Afghanistan, these were all former states of the Soviet Union, of the Russian Empire. And then when the collapse of the Soviet Union took place, you had all of these breakaway republics, right? The different countries broke away from the Soviet Union. So now you have Georgia, you've got the Stan countries, you've got all of these various what constituted part of the Soviet Union. And these Stan countries are predominantly Muslim, right? An overwhelming majority of the population is Muslim. And I got the opportunity, a terrific ministry partner that I have done stories with for so many years, probably about 3 decades, called Mission Eurasia. And they're based in Franklin, Tennessee. And following the collapse of the former Soviet Union, their heart was to go to these former Soviet Union states and to minister the gospel of Jesus Christ in these various countries. So Mission Eurasia does this work, kind of training the next generation. In many cases, they're first or second generation Christians. Keep that in mind as well, right? So they don't, like we have here in the States, just a plethora of avenues where we can learn about Christianity, apply them to the various aspects of our lives. In these parts of the world, it's so new, right? Sometimes they don't even have a Bible in their own heart language, right? And they don't understand biblical values, how to incorporate biblical values in, for example, how you run your business, in finances, in family life, how to raise godly children, how to have a godly marriage, how to be a believer in the marketplace. So what Mission Eurasia, in essence, does, teaching, in many cases, first-generation Christians, is how do you communicate your faith in your workplace, right? Can you do that? How do you do it safely? And so they invited me to go to Uzbekistan, and I've been with them to different parts of the former Soviet Union. And it was my first time to go to Uzbekistan. I've been to Kazakhstan. I've been to Kyrgyzstan. I've been to Turkmenistan. It was my first time to go to Uzbekistan. And wow, I didn't realize that the ancient Silk Road ran pretty much through Uzbekistan, right? And through Samarkand, which is a very famous spot in Central Asia, and then come through Bukhara. And Bukhara is quite symbolic for Muslims in Central Asia. It's one of the holiest Islamic cities in Central Asia. And as you said, it has the oldest, not the largest, it has the oldest mosque in all of Central Asia. And so many of the historic sort of Islamic cultural centers of higher education were based in Uzbekistan, and they still are. There are these beautiful mosques that are so old. I mean, 1,000+ years old.
Yeah.
And, they were centers of higher education, Islamic education in these, they called madrasas, the religious schools. They're all over all over the Muslim world. But, Muslim students would come from around the world, come to Bukhara and study and learn, the principles of Islam, study the Quran, and then they would go back, to their country. So there's so much history, so much history and thousands of years of history. And to walk the streets of Bukhara, to walk the streets of Tashkent, and to realize it has such a prominence in Islam, in the Islamic world, with all of the mixture of the trade, the hustle and the bustle of the trade, of the Silk Road going through Uzbekistan, just a lot of history. Yeah.
To be so steeped, not just religiously, but culturally in Islam, a country like Uzbekistan. Talk about these people that you interacted with, that you engaged with, who are now, that's all they've known religiously, and they're experiencing these supernatural dreams of Jesus coming to them. Many are also experiencing, as you reported, just miraculous healings.
Correct. Yeah.
That, of course, is spreading the news of the gospel and others to be curious. What is that like to be in a culture that is so dynamically Islamic?
Yeah.
To be experiencing the gospel of Jesus?
Terrific question, Tré. So one thing I think people need to realize in these countries of the former Soviet Union, especially in Central Asia, practicing a faith outside of the ruling orthodoxy, in this case Islam, is not always easy. In places like Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, very, very difficult, very challenging. People who walk away from Islam and embrace Christianity face a lot of persecution, jail time, a lot of harassment and pushback from their family members. In Kazakhstan, it's probably off the various Stan countries, it's probably the one country that is very tolerant of Christianity, gives more room for Christianity to grow. And the same case in Uzbekistan. I think it's 0.3%. Let that settle in for a second. 0.3%. We're not even talking 1%. 0.3%.
That's hard as a Westerner to fathom, right?
Exactly. When we're swimming in a sea of churches, every church is on a block, depending on your city here in the United States. But what's unique in the case of Uzbekistan is that when they elected a new president in 2016, President Shafkat, and he really opened up the country, and part of his calculus in order to attract foreign investors from the United States, from Turkey, from Saudi Arabia, from Russia, from India, from the European Union, he had to liberalize the country and open it up. It was a very closed country. And so he changed some of the religious laws that made it more accepting and tolerant of other faiths outside of Islam. So, for example, churches up until 2016, I think, according to my sources there, I think in the 10 years prior to 2016, I think only 2 or 3 churches were registered in that entire time period. Wow. After President Shafkat came to power in 2016, I don't know, I think they're up to like 25, 26 churches that are on the list or have already been approved by the government for registration, which is huge, very huge. And also the requirements for what constitutes a church has also come down, right? So before you had to have like 500 people to constitute a church. There's no way you're going to get 500 people, right, in a church. And so these small house churches where you have 5, 7, 10, 15, 20, 25, very small churches meeting in these home groups. Literally, they sit on the floor. And in fact, I was telling a colleague, it was so beautiful because you see the video and it reminds you of the book of Acts, how they got together in the upper room, right? Mm-hmm. And they sat around the table, very Middle Eastern style, right? They have these beautiful ornate carpets, beautiful cushions, and you sit crisscross, with your legs, and you have tea, and the food is on a small table, just a few inches from up from the floor, and then you sit around and have a cup of tea, and then in the process, these believers, they share with other. Their countrymen, majority of them are Muslim, and they tell them about how Jesus changed their lives and how Christ came to them in a dream, right? I cannot tell you how many times I've heard stories, and in my reporting in Central Asia, I remember amongst the Uyghur groups, I went to Kazakhstan and did a story, incredible story of how God is moving amongst the Uyghurs. People are thinking, who are watching us, like, the Uyghurs? Who the heck are the Uyghurs, right? But they're this large Muslim group, primarily found in China, in Western China, and probably you've heard of the persecution that the Uyghur Muslims have experienced under the control of the Chinese communist government. Well, there's a Uyghur community in Kazakhstan across the border from Western China. And I remember talking to this one Uyghur woman who said for 5 years, she had this debilitating sickness that she couldn't even leave her home. So she went to the mullahs, the imams of the mosque. She tried tarot cards, she tried Buddhism, she tried Hinduism, and just nothing could shake this disease. And then one day she had a dream. She was walking down this road and she sees this man in white and holding her hands and taking her along this street that just was illuminated with such a brightness. And she was like, I've never heard this man Jesus. I never heard his name. And so she went online and she typed in Jesus, and she saw a picture of Jesus, the typical picture you see of Jesus, and it was the man in her dream,
Wow.
and in the process, she gave her life to Jesus Christ. And like this, she was healed. That's just one story. Same thing happening in Uzbekistan, where these believers, majority of them a Muslim, have an encounter with Jesus. They see him in a dream, and then they go and ask somebody. Maybe they have a neighbor who is a Christian. They know he or she is a Christian, and they would come to them and say, "Hey, listen, I had this dream last night, and I saw this man in a white robe. Who is this person?" And then the stories out of Uzbekistan are just like this lady in Kazakhstan, where they're facing an illness, a terminal illness, or something that's happening in their home, and these believers, they just believe, lay hands on these Muslims and pray for them, and God miraculously touches their lives. And the beauty, Trey, in so much of the Middle East, and especially among Muslim cultures, is when one member of the family has an encounter with Jesus Christ, the entire family comes to Christ. The entire family comes to Christ. And in many cases, it can be the head of the household, the man of the household, because culturally speaking, he carries so much weight in the family. And then he shares the gospel with his wife and his children and his relatives, and the whole family comes to faith, which is just so beautiful. And I think I tell our viewers that in the middle of all the stuff that we're dealing with today, right, from the immigration crisis to the economic crisis to the social crisis to wars and rumors of wars, whether in Ukraine, in Gaza, you're dealing with earthquakes and tsunamis, you're dealing with tariff issues. God is on the move.
Yeah.
He is on the move. And the more we open our eyes to what's going on outside of our circle of influence, it's not always easy because we have a lot of things that weigh us down. But I think of this image of David in the Bible walking from Jericho to Jerusalem. And if you've ever been to Israel, as I have many, many times, you walk up the road up to Jerusalem, and you see these majestic mountains that surround Jerusalem. And the psalmist says, "Where does my help come from?" And he says, "My help comes from the maker of these mountains." And so I think it's very easy to get kind of our eyes stuck with all the things that are happening around your family, around your nation. And the reality is, and that's the beauty that I love about working for CBN News, is that we have the chance to go to these far-flung corners of the world and to show how, despite or in spite, whatever we're going through, that God is still touching people's lives all around the world, from North Korea to Saudi Arabia to Iran, to Pakistan to India and to the Stan countries, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. He's moving. He's not bothered about the political culture and the economic challenges that we're facing. He's on the move, and he's capturing the hearts of men and women in the Muslim world, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and he's capturing them. And bringing them into the kingdom of God. And he's using different ways. Historically, I think, people look to Western missionaries, primarily from the United States and Great Britain, right, and the European countries, these missionaries who would go to these far-flung corners of the world. These days, it's not always easy for an American missionary to go to Afghanistan, right, to Saudi Arabia, to Iraq or Iran, to North Korea. So what does God do? That doesn't mean because he doesn't have people to be vessels of his good news. He appears to them in dreams and visions. In fact, I remember talking to this gentleman, an Australian American whose family, his name is Wally Kulakov, a very Russian name, Wally Kulakov, and he talked about how his parents, they were from Kazakhstan, and they lived for 30 years, 40 years. His parents and his grandparents lived among the Uyghurs of Kazakhstan. And then for the last 30 years, now he's the son, and he has been a missionary to Central Asia. And I met him in Kazakhstan, and there was a moment where he was just weeping because he said, George, my grandparents didn't see the fruits. They labored for such a long time. And just a handful of Uyghur people came to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Today, I am seeing the fruits of their hard labor, of them sowing into the soil spiritually. And today he says, I am now seeing the fruits of what my parents labored for. And he says, there's a moment in the interview, he says, God, why me? Why me? Why not my parents who worked for 30 years? Didn't see, I think of people like Hudson Taylor, right, who labored for 30, 40 years in China. And I think in his whole time there, I think he saw maybe 20,000 people come to salvation in Jesus Christ in China. And today China has one of the largest Christian populations in the world. So I think it's just the way the Lord works in the middle of all these difficult and challenging times.
Well, there are two biblical principles that are just ringing in my mind as you're saying this. One, the gates of hell will not prevail against the kingdom of God, right?
Preach it.
God is going to do what he's going to do, and he's going to advance his kingdom no matter what. And then also that he's a jealous God. He wants to have relationships with his kids. So he's going to, if you or I or anybody else around the world is unable to get to, an unreached people group or to a group of people in Southeast Asia or anywhere else, God is going to do it himself because it's his prerogative to do that. But that leads me to a question about evangelism. So what is the state of persecution for believers in Uzbekistan? Are they able to share their faith in this new political climate?
Yeah, they are. And they do have those freedoms. They have to be careful of obviously, right? But it's not like it used to be prior to 2016. And so that can be a point of prayer that, you have an overwhelming Muslim majority, and they're open. They've opened up their nation to the outside world, and they're welcoming investors, and the country is really modernizing under President Shafkat. And what the believers say is that the Lord would keep those doors open, and even if it does shut, they will still continue to preach the gospel. They will continue to share the gospel with their fellow countrymen. But the freedom is there. You can't, for example, have a stadium, have a stadium event and hold a crusade. Most of this is happening one-on-one in homes, in home fellowships, because again, that's very cultural. That's the way
That's the way it was in the Bible.
Thank you. Exactly. So it's very culturally appropriate to share the gospel in that way. But what the believers tell me is just pray that they would have the boldness, continue the boldness, be strategic, and then the opportunity to bring the gospel into the marketplace. Right. So there's the guys from Mission Eurasia. Their whole emphasis is teaching young men and women, sort of the next generation of Uzbek leaders, how to make their faith come alive within the marketplace, and to be careful and at the same time strategic in how you share the gospel. So friendship evangelism is so important, part of the calculus of how you share the gospel, and then finding cultural ways and religious ways. It's so much easier if you're a former Muslim, because you understand the mentality, you understand the mindset. You used to be a Muslim, and so there are cultural and religious clues or hooks that they use in order to share the gospel with their fellow Uzbeks. And so, as a point of prayer, just pray that God would give them boldness, would give them strategic insight on how to share the gospel with each other, and then those who feel you face in some cases a sense of rejection from your family when you become a Christian. When you leave Islam, you're considered in many cases a sort of an outcast, and there are families that have experienced that and have prayed that God would reunite them, that God would touch their hearts. And they're working on them, but I'm encouraged that countries like Kazakhstan, like Uzbekistan, are slowly opening up, but countries like Turkmenistan, Tajikistan especially, very, very difficult, and the percentage of Christians in those areas, unreached people groups, so many unreached peoples in these countries of the former Soviet Union in Central Asia that have yet to hear the name of Jesus Christ. So that can be a point of prayer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, George, as we're wrapping up the conversation, I just want to ask you, because look, at CBN News, we cover everything. We cover all of the domestic issues that we quarrel about and that we fight over. And those are important things. Those are things that need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
But it's stories like this that I think really bolster our trust in the gospel and our trust in God. So how has this story, this trip, your interactions there kind of strengthened and encouraged you in your own faith journey?
I get fired up, bro, when I go to these places that are so different from what I'm used to, and the culture and the people, the cuisine, the food, the music, the instruments. Watch the piece. I mean, they're instruments that I've never seen in my life. That again, you're. When I'm creating new synaptic pathways in my brain, these kinds of experiences for me, Tré, create these new pathways in my brain, new experiences, and it gets me fired up. And it's a wonderful reminder of, that despite all of the things that I face in my own personal life and in our nation, right? That God, in His majesty, in His grace and mercy, is touching people's lives all around the world. And we here at CBN News, we haven't even scratched the surface, bro. Yeah. We just get a chance in a small way to go to these places and highlight these stories. And I'm encouraged. My faith is strengthened. And when I have those tough days, I remember the church in Uzbekistan. I remember the purity and just the innocence and the wholesome love that they have for each other, and the way they sit around the table on the floor and dance and drink tea and have a meal, and that sense of community is so strong. Here in the U.S., we're in some cases, individualistic, and again, I'm not criticizing our nation. This is who we are, right? This is our makeup. But then the chance to go to these other cultures and see a completely different way of life and how they go about. Now, do they have all the the sort of the trappings of modernity? Sure, absolutely. But in the process, they find their life is so simple and very easy. Easy in the sense that it's not a lot of drama. Yeah. And it's so encouraging. I'm so inspired when I go to these countries that most Americans have never heard of and probably cannot even find on a map. And then to profile what God is doing in these countries. And despite the challenges in their own nations with Islam and religious laws and so forth, they find a way to share the gospel with each other. And in many cases, they're not going to get their names or their stories plastered on the front pages of the New York Times, the Washington Post, or Fox News. But here at CBN News, we have a chance, the privilege and the honor to show how God is moving and how his name is being made famous amongst the Uyghurs of Kazakhstan, amongst the Uyghurs of China, amongst the Uzbeks, and the Tajiks and the Turkmenistans and the Kyrgyz in these countries. So be encouraged that God is on the move. He's moving all around the world. And he's moving in some of these countries that we see on our television screens, like in Iran. Today, Iran is the fastest growing. Christianity is growing fastest in Iran today than in any other part of the world. Just imagine, right? We just a couple of weeks ago launched a major military offensive against Iran. Be encouraged. The church in Iran is growing. Yes. Do they face persecution? Absolutely. Very, very difficult to practice your faith in Iran. You can get killed. You can get arrested, beaten up in Iran. But yet God is moving. And so to do these kinds of stories and to go to these places that most people have never heard of is just a thrill. Last year I had a chance to traverse the waters of the Amazon in Brazil, go to the remote jungle areas of the Amazon. God is moving in the Amazon, like in a major way, huge revival taking place in the Amazon basin in Brazil. So it's just awesome, man. I'm living a dream, and it's a privilege and honor to bring our viewers these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's just another reminder that we serve a mighty God who is after his kids, right? He wants to find his kids and bring us to himself. So for those watching who want to catch more of George's reporting, of course, you can just peruse here on our YouTube channel, but also go to cbnnews.com. You can catch his full and latest report on Uzbekistan. George Thomas, thanks so much for talking.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me on, sir.